Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. Our guests today, they're first-timers on the show. First up is Marlisa McLaughlin. She is here to talk about literacy, talk about games, learning, books, and a lot more, so stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My first guest today is Marlisa McLaughlin. She is, well, you're the co-owner, and we'll call you sort of a PR person for what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott.
Literacy, that was the big thing. When you approached us about doing the show, the basic gist was literacy. So let's talk about that and basically where we are in society as far as literacy goes. Can you talk about that?
So that's a hard question to.
It is. It's very broad.
It is broad, and it's also surprising. It was surprising to us to find out how much illiteracy there is in our country.
Yeah, a lot.
A real lot, and how many people are still hiding and struggling with it that you don't recognize, and not just our immigrants. It's also just, full-bred Americans who have been part of an illiterate family for many generations. So the school systems aren't able to help them develop because the family is not functioning literally at home. And that's all sort of very underground. So it's very uncommon, especially because technology is so advanced. And people can get by with icons and symbols, and they can function, as our grandfather was a functional illiterate. But the illiteracy is still painfully unrecognized, I think, from what we're starting to find out. And we're new in the field, so I apologize ahead of time.
No, that's okay. And the other thing, and I think the other reason why it's underground is it's something that's embarrassing for people. Their pride gets in the way. So even if there were avenues to turn to try to improve yourself, people sometimes have too much pride to want to take that first initial step to improve themselves. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. That's exactly what happened to our grandfather.
So let's talk about him, and when you say us, how did it all start and what is it basically?
Okay, us, my sister and I, Alicia, and her daughter Maxine, and my daughter Aldis, who is kind of a side winger. She's been away, and we've been supporting our grandfather and caretaking for him. So basically for 91 years, not a single person except our grandmother knew that he was illiterate.
It's amazing that a person can go through life and not have anybody know that, except his wife, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
And he was completely fully functioning. He designed and built his own house, was in town meetings. He navigated on the ocean. He was a captain of ships, as he called himself the other day. And he could do anything, and he could participate in conversations, and he had very strong opinions. He feigned reading the newspaper, so we never even knew he didn't know what was going on.
Interesting.
And he could just, like a lot of illiterate people, they follow the cues of others around them, and they can hide in the shadows of those who are literate. So we didn't know that, but we did know that he didn't have a high school diploma. And one day someone had gone to the Groton Public Library and saw a man who had co-written a book called Life is So Good by Richard Glaubman and George Dawson. I just forgot his name. And George Dawson was the son of a black slave. So he was completely illiterate with no opportunities. But at 98, he went and got his GED. And then he went on to pen this book.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah. So a friend of ours had an excerpt that she photocopied from the book, and she said, I know your grandfather doesn't have his GED or his high school diploma, so maybe this will inspire him. And I handed him the excerpt, and he looked it over and read it. And then
in quotes, you did that.
Yeah, because I thought he was reading it. And then he said, why don't you read this to me just to make sure I get everything? There's a couple of things I'm unclear about.
My eyesight, or something like that,
Yeah. And he also, he was tough with communication. He was really, really simple, and he struggled a lot with communicating.
Himself,
yeah, because he was really hard, and he didn't want to be hard, and he was always trying to find a middle point. So I read it to him, and he said, well, by golly, if he can do it, I can do it. So he said, I'm going to get my GED. So 2 weeks at least, I think, passed, and he began by signing his signature at the dining room table on the yellow lined paper and legal pad.
Could he do that?
He could just barely legibly write his name. which is also, thank goodness he could do that, because that was the one thing that he could always pass himself off as knowing how to write.
There had to have been a ton of points in his life where he did have to sign something, right?
Yeah, so he could scribble.
Right, yeah. Because there's plenty of bad handwriting out there, even for people who are literate.
Right. His driver's license story is the perfect example of him getting so far to get his driver's license because he was able to sign his name.
Isn't there a written part for the drivers even back then?
Yeah.
So somehow he fudged his way through that,
And
too,
if you read the story, you'll find out.
Wow, that's
Yes.
a nice tease there, an excellent tease.
Well,
Talk
it's
about-
really interesting because it was back in the day when you could cut through red tape. It would never happen anymore,
Right.
but it's interesting because his lifespan is a span of our last century, which takes the end of the Industrial Revolution at its peak down and withering out, and then peaking up into technology where everything's moving really rapidly. So he has covered in his lifetime that transitional period, being illiterate.
I'm just thinking, you or I, deciding if we wanted to go back to college one day, it would be somewhat of a daunting task just because we've been out of it for a while in the sense that we've gotten on with our careers. But can you imagine a person in their 90s, the daunting task that must be to kind of get yourself back acclimated into a learning mode, and the world in a sense has passed you by. It's amazing that you can get your GED at 98, just that you have the ability to be able to get back into that mode of learning and getting a diploma. That's remarkable.
Well, he didn't get that far.
Right, but I mean,
But
the fact
George
that
Dawson did.
Right, but
yeah.
the course, you're on that path. You know what I mean?
I know
of
exactly
literacy.
because that's the energy he had at the dining room table. He'd get up before sunrise, the sun would come up, he would begin, and he really wouldn't move very much until the sun went down, and he never even turned the lights on because he was just in that, his will was so strong. And it wasn't until the 2 weeks later that he found out that he had signed a document that he couldn't read, and it cost him a lot of his independence and a lot of hardship later on.
Oh boy.
And that's when he said, someone said to him, hey, don't you know what this says? And he said, no, I can't read. And so that was huge for us because we were just thinking, he doesn't have his diploma.
Did you suspect at all during little situations where he would ask you to read this, like at any point during life, or did he was able to kind of fool everybody?
Totally.
Yeah?
He was such a strong man. I mean, he'd go out in the worst of weather and be one of the only boats to come back in first, or he'd go out when no one was going out and he'd come back in. And he had taught himself to navigate and learn from his coworkers.
And so you don't need to use like charts or anything when
he learned to chart.
Okay.
And he could write. I remember because I worked with him on the boat that I would see his scratches because he'd say, "Okay, we got to find this buoy," and then there'd be numbers, and there'd be the NEWS, for the the cardinal directions. And I always felt strange when I looked at it, like, why does he write like this? And I always thought it was because his hands were big and they were hard-working and he grabbed the pencil awkwardly or something. But he was so uncomfortable making that connection that it showed up like that all the time.
Right.
So we never suspected.
Well, it was certainly not that he doesn't have the ability to learn or that he was unintelligent, because he taught himself how to navigate. That's not an easy thing to do. Chart courses is not an easy thing to do.
Well, it's interesting that you use that terminology because CNN came and interviewed him. And one of the things the woman said while she was in the midst of taping, she pulled me aside and she said, Marlisa, did you ever realize that your grandfather was such an incredibly good writer? And I didn't know when we were going to release the book whether anyone would even think he was a good writer because of how much he struggled just to communicate. But he didn't need editing, and he has this intelligence, and it was all buried underneath, well, that kind of the intelligence that shows up like that, literally.
Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit and talk about how the book came about, the genesis of it.
Okay, so after he mastered his signature and the alphabet and then admit that he was illiterate, he began the process of getting like second and third grade work, because he did leave school at third grade, but he really didn't get much education.
Yeah, you kind of need a refresher
also a good
course.
story.
Yeah.
He didn't, but he got pulled out all the time because
Okay.
his dad was real brutal. And one of our cousins was teaching school, so she came in every now and then and would sit and she would say, okay, let's look at this third grade work, and then they'd start. So by the time my grandmother died, it was about a year of him kind of working his way towards that, and he could put together small words, 3 letters, 4 letters. He had some sight recognition words he knew, and he was just beginning to understand vowels and consonants. And that's funny too. I remember sitting with him once and was trying to help him understand that A can sound different. So we would sit there and A, making all these funny sounds.
Long A, short A,
exactly.
You have to learn that. Yeah.
So he had to go all the way back to that, and it was a whole new universe for him. And then Graham died, and then he got really depressed.
Yeah. You kind of don't feel like, having that be a part of your life when your emotion, you shut down a little bit.
He was totally shut down, and he then was living alone. And he would watch Jeopardy religiously and Wheel of Fortune.
You get smart watching that show, Jeopardy, for sure.
And Wheel of Fortune with the letters.
Yep.
And we still weren't quite sure. Well, we knew how illiterate he was, but I don't think we really ever stopped to wonder with the Wheel of Fortune. He was just constantly trying to learn, but it wasn't connected to his books. And then he became ill and needed to go into assisted living, and he was really depressed. He had lost his independence then, and this guy, he was like probably 6'2.5", 3 in his prime, and he was only like 6 feet at 98 years or 96 years old.
That's big.
So big, 90s, brawny, capable, strong, always did religiously his exercises every day. And he just became withered, and he was really forlorn, and my sister recognized that his depression was getting so bad that it was bordering, what do I have to live for now that I've lost my home and I'm here by myself? So she recognized that and remembered how stimulated he was for the reading, and went and got him a tutor, Mark Hogan, from the literacy agency in New London, volunteer. And that's where the charisma and the magic for the book started, because along with learning a little bit more and making sentences, storytelling followed. And Mark he had lost his father, so there was a father figure kind of feeling
Connection
going
right
on.
There, yeah.
And my grandfather, it's strange, I was just thinking about this yesterday, because he didn't really have Mark as a son in his heart in that way, because Mark was really the leader in the relationship, because Mark was the smarter one, because my grandfather always felt so subordinate to people who had education, even though he could do anything.
Yep. He
literally.
just didn't even realize his capabilities.
And he was so ashamed.
Yep.
So that blocked so much off. And that's what, when you asked originally about illiteracy, that's the thing that is so painful to recognize, is how many people are really suffering at levels beyond. And that, of course, can go into illnesses that are, everything so...
It's a domino effect.
It is.
In a lot of cases. And all the statistics, I would imagine, that we have on illiteracy doesn't even come close to what the actual numbers are for people that just won't come out and admit it or talk about it. I mean, we talked about one man who you didn't know about for many years was illiterate. So how many other people out there who aren't part of the statistics that we just don't know about?
And we found a lot out through fan mail, because we were getting it from all over the world after the book came out, because it went viral over one weekend. And so many people of all different ages from all different countries came out and said, I've got a 51-year-old brother who can't read, or I have a 95-year-old man, a fisherman in Great Britain, or somebody from Arkansas who was a teacher called me and said, this state is, that's what interesting, that it's the lowest rate of illiteracy in our country. And she was the one who awakened me to tell me about the generational gaps in learning and how illiteracy is almost genetic because of the inability to open up because of the shame.
One of the examples you mentioned there was a fisherman, and there was an interesting story about that, about the title of the book. So let's sort of segue over to that and about how the book came about and how the title of the book came about.
Oh, good. That's a good one, because it's perfectly timed in with he and Mark, because they would get there talking together, and then Mark pulled us aside one day and said, I think if we get Jim, Captain, he always called him Captain, to write these stories down for his life stories, it might just get him more stimulated to learn faster, or not even so much faster, but just to have the confidence. He was getting him to cross a bridge that he was just about ready to cross. And my grandfather was extremely stubborn. And you can only imagine that generation, a man succeeding in all those things, and he just was just starting to come out, and he was very vulnerable. So one day I was trying to help him understand that he couldn't do what he was trying to do with a simple word, and he got so frustrated, and he goes, "You don't understand, I'm writing in a fisherman's language." So I said, there it is, there's a title for your book.
It came to you, that's perfect.
It came to him, because that's exactly what he was doing, and he couldn't sort of remove himself from being a fisherman and being a writer, because he had also had his own prejudice against himself that Fisherman, and especially we grew up being Portuguese, he's from the Azores, so there was always going jokes that, Portuguese are stupid. Hey, what's a Portuguese guy doing or whatever, and it would always be something to that effect. And he had that in his own internal being constantly with everything that he did. There was always that element. So the title really popped for him in so many different ways.
Now, reading the book, reading the title might not, give certainly wouldn't give a true description of what the book is about. So in a nutshell, what is the book about?
It pretty much will take you from his life back in the Azores. He was born in Somerville, Massachusetts. He was the 8th of 10 children, and the 7 children older than he were born in the Azores, and then the family came to the States. And I'm really not quite sure, we never found out why they went back to the Azores, but he spent his childhood there, and then he came back. Coming to America is one of the chapters.
Now, what town did you say? Was that
Somerville, Massachusetts?
Somerville, and then you get into the New Bedford Fall River area, and there's a very large Portuguese population in that neck of the woods anyway, right?
That's where they went.
Okay.
They went from Somerville to New Bedford,
It's
Fall
also a
River.
big fishing area, too. So.
Yeah, so he went to his American community, and then they left, and then they came back to New Bedford, but then from there they came to Stonington.
Okay.
His dad came first, and then he followed.
Another, fishing, boating town,
Yeah.
as it were, too. So I also want to understand how we went from book and also to playing a game where you're actually learning, but it's still a game. It's fun, but you're learning at the same time.
Well, that has to do with once the book actually came to pass. We only published it, we self-published it, because he said, all I want to do before I pass is sit in my chair and read my book.
And nowadays, really anybody can write a book, but you can also self-publish, whether it's online or doing it the way that you did it too. So there are many more opportunities to be able to put a book out.
Great point, because that is transitioning now, and we learned so much. We got just bombarded from every angle, learning about the publishing industry, and it actually was to our benefit not to choose to go to a bigger publisher. I mean, the distribution nearly killed us because we didn't know.
Was it more of a daunting task than you ever realized?
We didn't even realize it was going to be a task. We were just going to get this book done for him, and then suddenly Fox News showed up on his door one day, and over one weekend my phone didn't stop ringing the next morning on Monday, and it was from somebody in Texas, and I said, how did you see this? It was just our local news station. He just signed books at his elderly assisted living. And she said, oh, it was on, I don't even know who got it, but it just went bang.
This is the kind of story where the networks would love it. It's tugging at the heartstrings, and they love these kind of stories. It's a feel-good story. It's a people kind of a story. So they would love to air, because there's plenty of bad news in the news. But this is sort of a, what they would consider like a kicker story. You always end your newscast with just a feel-good story, and this certainly would qualify. So it's not surprising that the big networks would be, ringing your phone trying to understand what this is all about.
And they did. And getting back to Port, which is the literacy program, another group of people were very inspired, and it was the 3rd grade class from Ledyard Center School. And their teacher, Carol Ambosh, had bought the book, and she was reading the stories. They wrote him fan letters, and he felt so touched and obligated that he went and received their invitation. And as we were coming into class, actually to back up, before we even went, he said, if I'm going to have the impact I know I can have on these kids, we need to get the media, we need to get everything ready so that these kids will remember this day far beyond just this day. And maybe, and that was his deepest hope, maybe they will definitely never give up, and they will learn to read and write, and they won't suffer like I have, and they can turn this country around. Like, he was really strong about turning the country around and reaching the roots at the 3rd grade level where he left off when he left school. So we got there, and one of the kids touched his wheelchair, and I heard them go, oh, I just touched his chair. And I said to myself, he's like a rock star or a movie star to these kids.
Yeah,
they were just...
They'd ask for his autograph, right?
Oh, well, they'd ask him for anything. They were just like, there was such an intimate exchange. There was such a connection. And they began to use the book and coin phrases like when the teacher said, this is not correct. but Mrs. Ambrose, it's in a fisherman's language. And then my grandfather had a hard time with quotation marks and periods.
It's funny because you use them a lot when we talk.
I don't even realize,
Yeah.
because, and I'm probably thinking that because he called them butterflies, and he was cursing all the time, like, I don't even want to learn about this grammar. And that was frustrating for Mark, his tutor, because Mark was trying to also take him along the literacy path with the storyline in the memoir. And it kind of retarded the process a little bit for him. So he just left it alone and called them butterflies. Well, the kids started calling them butterflies and using his terminologies for grammatical usage.
And what was the teacher's reaction to all this?
She was so charmed.
Yeah, is that right?
She connected with my grandfather. The first 15 seconds, I wish we had the photograph. We took a picture of the two of them together, and it's as if they had known each other. And Carol was there when he passed in January. She was one of the last people he had enough energy to speak with. And of course, her class was called the Shining Stars, and he was saying to her, please tell the Shining Stars, you know, carry on, and it was really beautiful. But because of their reaction, my sister said, he can't travel to different schools. When other kids this age see all the attention and how much of a stir this is going to cause, and she didn't like school at all. She had a really hard time getting into the non-creative way.
Yeah.
She said, let's move the book, and around that thought came this game, Port to Port. So it's a literacy game, but it's not really like shake the dice and go around the board. It's a lot of innovative ideas based on the story material in the book, and getting the kids stimulated to write and also to connect to other students because the book will travel.
You know, and that's the thing. The standard curriculum in school may be boring to some kids and they may get disinterested. But when you make it fun, when you make something like a game, they're playing, they're enjoying it. But at the same time, they're actually learning something too. That stimulates the mind. They don't even realize they're learning, but they are.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a double bonus right there.
Yeah,
right?
and they love it. And there's just lots of fun stuff to get. Like there's a pen pal connection, so the kids will get a bracelet and their pen pal will have one. And when this first pen pal exchange happened, they actually even started talking about and critiquing the Fisherman's Language book. So they were making this, and the pen pal thing started because the kids said, gosh, Port to Port's leaving our school. We want to stay connected to the next school and the next school and the next school. So
now, you have a website, and when you go on the web, what's on the website, first of all?
The homepage has a little sort of RIP for our grandfather and what his intentions and his mission was in life. And then we have a port-to-port literacy page where you can track where the book goes, because the objective is send it to one school in each state so it goes to all 50 and then hits the president's desk, and then from there hopefully it will travel around the world.
That's the goal, right?
Yes.
Okay, and how far along in that quest are you? Very small. Okay.
Well,
you're just getting started out with it.
Yes,
then.
and he became ill, and it was a long ride, and then he passed, and we were just recovering because we were his sole caretakers for the past 5 years.
And there's events on the website, or there will be, for things that you have coming up.
Up-and-coming events. We have an elder care page, elder resources. That's also just starting. But we found in caretaking there is so much information that it's not coordinated and not even available. And these are critical decisions you need to make for your elder. It can cost them their life. And it can also cost you yours, because caretakers' fatigue is rampant, and people don't even know they have it. You can't even some days think straight by the end of the day because you're dealing with levels and levels and levels of things that need to be done.
You know, people talk about the individual, but also the people around them, how it affects them, whether it's family or friends, and that's exactly the situation that you had to deal with yourself, right?
Yeah, we were really, and we didn't. It wasn't a normal circle, if there is a normal, but the added element of at 98 years old, now suddenly here's this man who uncovers his shame, has this incredible, goal that he's reached, has touched the hearts of people. We were getting letters from, there was a woman who was teaching Japanese, she was Japanese on a sailboat in Japan. People in Australia, Canada, those were the two countries that really hit it, the Philippines, Europe, the continent. It didn't seem to get to Africa or South America, but it went everywhere else. So our grandfather couldn't even quite comprehend, here I am just a poor fisherman, why do people come up to me and just touch my shoulder when I'm in the dining room? Or he would go from a sense of grandiosity to I'm nothing, I don't get this, why am I any
Not understanding. Yeah.
Right. So that was for caretakers. We really struggled a lot with what his transitioning into the elder years when they lose their independence and they also begin to lose trust in everyone and everything. And then he's stubborn, so in a fisherman's language, his physical body would have been, I don't know, in a healthy, decaying body's language, because he went through that part of not wanting to let go of the fact that he could not do. Like if he needed something tightened in his room, like his desk or whatever, why don't you just bring me my toolbox and I'll fix the thing? Of course he cursed. But he couldn't bend down and he couldn't do the work, and he would still push us to do these things for him, to help him assist himself, and he couldn't. So, you know, the caretaker's fatigue goes into so many different levels.
So, you know, we were talking about the website. We had put a graphic up. We'll put a graphic up on the screen. What is the website?
www.fishermanslanguage.com.
And I know also you're involved with social media. So if they go on the website, they'll be able to click onto your Facebook page.
Facebook link, Twitter. And we do have a couple links to our local bookstores that carry the book. And we're trying to get more of the bookstores on as well. And we finally just put together, and almost finished, a PowerPoint presentation for the game, because we're trying to get that out there to see if somebody wants to pick it up or see if we can't move it into the system.
Eventually you'll have an app for it, you know, on people's tablets and smartphones, because that's, you know, that's the way to go now. You know, we talked earlier in the show about technology moving along. When if you have that, you know, you've arrived too. And there's a lot of educational apps, not just entertainment apps. And this kind of falls into two categories. It's fun, but you're also learning from it at the same time, if it should ever evolve into that. But it's certainly a promising start for you. Very exciting. You sound very passionate about it. I mean, but it's close to home because you're talking about a family member too, but also good for society in general, especially a very serious topic that probably needs to be talked about more, illiteracy. So we are out of time. We didn't get a chance to have Maxine come on the show. But we just the topic was so fascinating, and you sounded so passionate about it that we just let you go the whole time.
We'll come back.
Yeah,
we'll have
back.
Maxine and Alicia come on next time.
Yeah, and both of them I've discovered off camera can talk a lot themselves. So we'll put the graphic up on the screen one more time, and just thank you very much for being on the show and kind of spreading the word a little bit more, not just about the book and the game, but also about illiteracy in general. So thanks. A pleasure having you on. And again, we would like to have you back, okay?
Oh, thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
That is our show for today. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. You can see this show as well as many others on our YouTube page. So come back and see us again soon, too. Sean Murphy, this is For the Record. We will see you next time.